I see everybody's logging in.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
How many is that, do you know?
So far, I see the number ticking over. It's at 51 right now.
Wow.
So let's give it another few seconds, and then I will welcome everybody, and we can actually begin the program.
Sounds good.
'61.
61, sounding good. Okay.
Can people join as it's going on?
Yes, they may.
Oh. Well, that's good.
Inevitably, somebody will be late, but
65.
Okay. In the interest of time, maybe we should get started since we only have an hour. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the 2020 legislative discussion, proudly presented by the League of Women Voters. My name is Aya D. Simone. I am a board member with the League of Women Voters here in Greenwich and also a member of the Communications and the Programming Committee. We appreciate you being here today, and we hope that you will enjoy the program. I would like to explain the format for today and just take a minute to make sure that everybody's clear on how things will work. This is a webinar, and as such, the only people with audio and video access and who you will see will be the legislators and our moderators and hosts. Everybody else will be in audience mode and will be in view only mode. So the only people you will see are the hosts and the legislators. So don't panic if you can't see yourself on screen. We are basically going to use the same format that we do at our normal picnic, but in a virtual format. We will start with the voter services questions for our legislators. That should take 30 to 40 minutes of moderated discussion, followed by another 15 to 20 minutes of audience Q&A. Audience Q&A, you can participate by using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a laptop, you'll see it at the bottom right-hand side towards the right-hand side of your screen on the bottom. If you're on a mobile device, you'll see the same Q&A icon that looks like a speech bubble on the top right-hand side of your screen. All you need to do is type in your question, and our moderators will use those as part of the audience Q&A, and will actually go first in, first out. If there are repetitive questions or very similar questions, they'll group them together and ask them appropriately. We will endeavor to get through as many questions as possible in the time that we have allotted. We do only have an hour scheduled, but we did ask our legislators if we would be able to take an extra 10 or 15 minutes should we have the luxury of having more questions than we expect. So please stick with us if that's the case. And with that said, let's get started. I'd like to introduce and hand over the microphone to the League of Women Voters of Greenwich President, Sandy Waters. Sandy, over to you.
just want to welcome everybody to our, which is an annual event for us, a discussion with our state legislators about what has recent legislative session. Normally, we would be having this as a picnic out by the Sound on a beautiful day with no rain. But given the pandemic and our current situation, we are going to a technologically more advanced process. So I hope you'll hang with us. We're getting better at this. We've done a number already. And I just want to thank and draw attention to the commitment of some of our board members who helped make this happen. Aya, who has been our techno whiz, she claims she won't do that forever. We're going to pass that baton around. And, but also especially to Joanne Stavru and to Becky Gillen, who are the heads of our Voter Services Committee and have organized all the details of this. So I just want to thank them for their efforts. And I appreciate all of you for attending and listening to this, engaging the public in a full understanding of what their government does is an important part of the mission of the League of Women Voters. So back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy. Okay, we're going to get started with the questions with our legislators. I'm going to hand this over to Joanne. Joanne, please.
Okay, thank you, Aya and Sandy. I would like to thank our legislators for coming, and I'd like to thank the audience for joining in. State Senator Alex Kasser, Representative Libby Florin from the 149th District, Representative Steve Meskers from the 150th District, and Representative Harry Aurora from the 151st District. Before we begin, the League would like to acknowledge Libby Florin, who is retiring. She has been a Connecticut State Representative since 2001. We have a citation for her, which I will deliver to her, but we'll read it here now. The League of Women Voters of Greenwich hereby honors Libby Florin in appreciation of her many years of public service and her dedication to the mission of the League of Women Voters as a member, program participant, and tireless advocate for good government. By supporting campaign finance reform and improved government ethics and transparency, and by fostering an inclusive political process, she has protected the rights and privileges of the citizens of Connecticut. The League Board extends its congratulations and best wishes on this memorable occasion. Congratulations, Libby. We're going to miss you. Your leadership has marked Greenwich well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'll tell you, I thank each and every one of you for your loyalty and your support all these years. You have been true partners in the public policy process, and I'm grateful to you. And as one of my favorite philosophers says, Winnie the Pooh, I've been so fortunate to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. Thank you.
Well, we have been fortunate to know you too. 2020 is an important election year, both nationally and locally. All 4 of the legislators here seats are up for re-election, as is Connecticut's 4th congressional seat, which is now held by Jim Hines. So please remember to vote on November 3rd. The Democratic and Republican primary election presidential primary election is on August 11th. You are a member of either party, you have received an absentee ballot application. If you wish to vote by absentee ballot, you must complete the application, mail it back in the enclosed envelope. You will then receive the ballot, the actual ballot, from the town clerk's office, and you will have to complete it and mail it back in the enclosed envelope that they give you. We have spoken to Fred DeCaro and Mary Haggerty, who are our town registrars, and they have told us the biggest problem that Greenwich has with absentee ballots is that they're not completed correctly, or they arrive too late to be counted. So if you plan to vote that way, please be mindful of that. For today, we will start out with each legislator speaking for 3 to 4 minutes about the abbreviated 2020 session. Then the League will ask 2 questions, which our legislators have received. Alex, we'll start with you for your 4 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank the League so much for hosting this and for all you do to inform and engage citizens. And just special thank you to Libby for her principled leadership and incredibly dedicated public service all these years. She's a role model for me, and I know for many others, so thank you, Libby. Well, the 2020 legislative session lasted all of 5 weeks. I'm sure you all know that the Capitol closed on March 11th. So, which doesn't mean that we stopped working. We started working furiously, but doing other things, policy shaping and working directly with constituents to get them the resources and answers they need. But in terms of what happened in the legislative session during those 5 weeks, I can tell you what I did and what I hope to accomplish. And I also want to say that even though the legislative session ended abruptly on March 11th, I am very eager to get back up there and to start legislating again. And as banking chair, I actually organized one of the first virtual committee hearings. It was a public meeting on Zoom. in May, and I called the hearing because I wanted to hear from people, banks, credit unions, how we can help those impacted by COVID and keep the legislative process going. And I am very eager to get back into special session to address the many issues that are now even more urgent because of COVID. So I hope that we'll have an announcement any day now about the exact dates that we'll be back in the Capitol. So when I was there during those 5 weeks, I introduced 2 major pieces of legislation and was making significant advances on them. And I'll just give you the highlights of them. The first was the Connecticut Infrastructure Bank that I introduced in the Banking Committee. This was also a bill that I passed last year on the Senate. It was the only bill to allow public-private partnerships for infrastructure. And so I brought it back this year. It was making headway in my negotiations with OPM. It's an updated version of the 2019 bill because Connecticut taxpayers should not pay 100% of the bill for our infrastructure, for fixing our bridges, roads, and rails. And there's a lot of other money available, including a $100 million grant from the Federal Department of Transportation for any state that that establishes a new infrastructure bank. So there's incentive to do that. The second piece of groundbreaking legislation that I introduced is something called Jennifer's Law, which is named after Jennifer Doulos, and thousands of women who, like her, are controlled and endangered by abusive partners. And a major problem in Connecticut law is that it only recognizes physical violence as domestic violence. And my bill would expand the definition to include coercive, controlling behaviors. And just before the Capitol closed, 2 days before, I met with the chief judges who said they've literally been waiting for this change for years. And they published an op-ed supporting my bill. And now, because of COVID, domestic violence has gone up. And this is an even more urgent issue than it was before. So I cannot wait to get back to legislating because there is so much important work to be done. I'll stop there.
Libby?
Okay. Well, my sincere thanks to Joanne and to Becky and Aya and the League for being so nimble and so creative to reimagine our legislative picnic. And frankly, the only drawback I can find to date is the virtual deviled eggs just don't taste the same. I'm sorry about that. As Alex said so cogently, we expect to go back into special session on the week of July 20th. And we're scheduled to discuss public safety reform and voting by absentee ballot. Now, my caucus petitioned in May to include in any special session a debate on the state budget and deficiency accounts, the allocation of COVID federal relief funding to municipalities, and the formation of a bipartisan commission to review the executive orders that have been issued by the governor during the public health emergency. And these orders will expire on September 9th. Our special session agenda request has not been met. Therefore, as it turned out, the only bill actually passed into law during our very, very short session was public HB 5518, the bond bill. I'm ranking member on bonding, and Representative Mesker serves on the committee with me. Our comprehensive bipartisan legislation adheres to the governor's debt diet without imposing starvation. It was an example of intermittent fasting. The bond bill proves that restrained and strategic borrowing is a useful financial tool to help Connecticut prepare for economic recovery and growth. Highlights of our bond package include: it remains within the 90% debt limit and the $1.9 billion bond cap. It restricted all new authorizations, and it reduced or delayed or canceled prior authorizations that were not already in process or no longer needed. Main thing is we also preserved school construction reimbursement, and we authorized municipal aid funds like LOCIP, the Local Capital Improvement Program, and TAR, which is Town Aid Road. And we maintained competitive local grants like the Small Town Economic Assistance Program, or STEEP, Urban Act, and the Nonprofit Funding Pool. In addition, we provided $200 million for transportation infrastructure improvement and repairs. That was a very, very long list in a very, very short time. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Thank you. Well, first off, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting together this forum. The work you do in this era of hyper-partisanship is very important. Your efforts to promote issue-oriented discussions in a clear and balanced manner help both the voters and the elected officials sift through the noise and focus on solutions for our community. It's been a challenging year for all of us. As I said prior, we've had an abbreviated session of 5 weeks. So legislatively, very little was accomplished in terms of passing bills, and Livy mentioned the bond bill. So as the pandemic swept through our community, you should know that I've been working tirelessly to resolve the pressing issues at hand. I work with the DOL to resolve issues for our residents regarding individual problems with unemployment benefits, advising our nonprofits and businesses with the payroll protection plan. In addition to that work, I reached out to the governor's office and am working closely with Neighbor to Neighbor and Meals on Wheels. I've joined with them and Brian Hulbert, our Commissioner of Agriculture, who is our newly appointed food czar, to address food security issues and try to set up a coordinated purchase arm to ensure supplies and distribution to our food banks and our food pantries in Lower Fairfield County. I've been conferencing daily and now weekly with our local elected officials on the rollout of the Reopen Connecticut plan to keep our state safe. And I want to thank the governor for his bold action and successful effort to stem the spread of the virus in our state. And I said before, we approved our bond bill, and that really helped at least to set the tone for where we are going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Harry? Oh, Harry, you have to unmute. Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for organizing this. I really appreciate that. We need forums like this to be able to communicate, to get the discussion and the dialogue, and I'm very thankful to the League. And Livy, we will miss you. I will miss you. I thought, she was teaching me the ropes, and then, you are going to be retiring, but, thank you so much for your service. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I think we have to break up this discussion into what was to happen, and we were working on until time stopped, so as to say, and what we did, because it's just as all the legislators, Alex and Livy and Steve mentioned, we have been working hard since then. So what we were working on, as we know, the tolls, which really evolved in a certain way, that was last year's work. At the end of the day, they were not required. That's what the community really asked for, and that's where we ended up. There were 2 other legislations which were getting quite some traction. One is on the legalization of marijuana, and there was quite some hearings and debate on that. And I encourage anybody who's interested to take a look on the CGA website. Those discussions will continue. And similarly, on online gambling or online sports betting, there were quite some interesting conversations in public hearings, and we're going to continue those next year. Now, on my side, there were 2 bills which I was working on, and they were being done in a bipartisan manner. One was to introduce utility-grade solar projects, which the state would provide permitting and encourage those to be shovel-ready, so as to say, because utility solar is basically at a price which is equivalent to to fossil fuel energy. And so to someone like me, who's basically economically very sensitive to the fact that we can't take energy prices higher, but at the same time believes that we need to go to solar and other renewable forms of energy, that really is something we need to, it's an offer we can't refuse, because here is something we can do at the same price as fossil fuel energy. And we know Millstone, which is our nuclear plant, which serves more than half of our energy needs in Connecticut, is going to retire over the next 5 to 10 years. And what we don't want is to be unprepared and then have to rely on a lot more of fossil fuel and a lot more of perhaps even coal. So it had bipartisan support in the committee. And the whole idea is that we would create these large projects, and utilities scale projects are large projects, 500 megawatts. So they will really move the needle. So just to give you an idea, all the way for all the residents and distributed solar, rooftop solar as they call it, what we've done is all adds up to 50 or 100 megawatts. And it costs a lot. It's 3 times the price of utility solar. So that's a bill which we are going to continue to work on next year. The other bill which I worked on was to provide higher education scholarships for middle class to go to Connecticut schools, to Connecticut universities, and to be funded by private donations, and to provide incentives on estate tax to make those donations prolific. So we know that middle class in Connecticut really suffers a lot because if you're making what may be called above income levels which do not get any grants or supports, which may be $80,000 a family a year, really in Connecticut and in our towns, that's not really luxurious living by any means, and it's impossible to afford $20,000 or so for higher education, or $14,000 even for higher education, which is the current UConn fees once you add up everything. So again, bipartisan support in the committee, and it was very clear it was going to get out of committee. And the whole idea was it's not going to require any funding from the state. It's going to be funded by private donations, and those private donations are going to become attractive by offering some future estate tax credits, and done in a way that doesn't cost the state. So those were the 2 bills. And we were able to really work across the aisle very well. And I'm very, very thankful to my colleagues in the assembly to help there. And then, after the COVID hit, we've been working nonstop on helping our community. It's the DOL, obviously, which Steve mentioned. I think we really need some secular long-term fixes. Just for the record, the DOL grants or money given will be the largest ever cash transfer in Connecticut. By the time it's done, between the federal, state, and state monies, it's going to be close to $5 billion. I think right now we're at 2.5 or something like that. And so this is and it was done very, not really well. And we have been working with DOL, and they've been working hard. But the systems were broken. It's really been a work of a hard work to get our community and all members who needed this assistance badly to the finish line. And even today, I spent time with pretty much counseling as a help desk for 3 or 4 of our residents in our community, helping them and getting them the resource they needed. So
thank you all.
I will stop there, and then thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, and thank you all. I can see, how much harder it was for you with the legislature being closed. But thank you for all your hard work. And now we will ask you our 2 questions. Becky, do you want to start?
So these questions have been given to the legislators in advance. So they have had some time to think about them. And the first question, it revolves around the state of the economy of the Connecticut. Connecticut's unfunded pension liabilities are threatening other state budget priorities. This is a top concern for businesses deciding whether to invest in Connecticut. In view of binding pension agreements with state unions and sensitivity to volatility of investment returns on state funds, how have you and how will you continue as legislators work to ease this problem, especially in view of COVID-19, which is adding more money that's been spent? Raise your hand, whoever wants to go first. Okay, Alex.
Thank you so much for asking this question. This is a major issue in Connecticut. It was before COVID and it will be after COVID. I have consistently voted against pay raises on state employee labor contracts. I also advocated in the Senate with party leaders to freeze employee pay this year because of COVID and the economic impact to our state. Before COVID, the state employee pension liability was somewhere between $90 and $125 billion. That is just an unsustainable burden. And that is why I tackled the issue head on and introduced 2 bills to fix the pension crisis. The first bill would have shifted Connecticut to a shared risk plan, which is what Rhode Island has, and capped high cost pensions. The second bill was actually a constitutional amendment requiring the state to fully fund pensions and end the cycle of kicking the can down the road, which is how we got here. Neither of these bills did advance, but we all know that major change like this takes years of work and persistence, and I will not give up. But I want to talk about, just quickly, another bill that I introduced and did pass into law because it addresses the issue on the front end, the fact that young people now carry a disproportionate amount of the state's financial burden. And everybody should know that Connecticut has the highest average student loan debt in the country, which is a major problem because young people start their careers in debt. It takes longer to buy a home. It takes them on average 14 years to pay off their debt, which adds another 7 years to when they can actually start purchasing a home and accumulate savings. So starting out at a deficit, carrying that financial load into their future, it's bad for them and it's bad for our state. So I introduced something called SB 72, which was passed into law. It is the first law in Connecticut that reduces student loan debt. It allows Connecticut college graduates who live and work here to have part of their college debt repaid by employers. And it was supported by Connecticut realtors and other groups who recognize that lowering this college debt accelerates home sales and alleviates financial burden, helps address the front end of the pension problem, will draw new residents and revenue to our state. So, there's no easy answer to the pension crisis, which is why politicians generally avoid the topic, but I remain committed to solving it from all angles and fixing the state's finances as long as I'm in office.
Thank you. Libby?
Well, I commend Alex, especially for her student loan initiative. I thought that was wonderful. As far as pensions go, though, I think that promises made have to remain promises kept. But going forward, I think that's when we can make some real change. We should not allow overtime to be included in the pension calculation. It's been the last 4 years of service. Most people who then, who have retired from either a low-level job or from the legislature are given a commissioner's job or whatever, where their salary just escalates. And those 4 years then serve as the basis. That's just wrong, that along with overtime. I think going forward, we're going to have everyone contribute toward the pension the way we now are contributing toward our medical plan. And I know that there is a federal review of SERS right now, the state employee retirement system, because a lot of the pensions have gone over what the federal guidelines say. They're much too high. But it all boils down to, it's going to have to come to union negotiations. And that is the sticky wicket. But I think that we are in such a mess and a muddle that everyone's going to have to come to the table. Thank you.
Steve? Oh, Steve, we'll just do it numerically. Steve, you can go.
Okay, thank you. So first off, the problem on pensions is a long-seated problem. I think the commentary from Livy and from Alex, and I suspect the comment that will come out from Harry, will be acknowledgement of the intractable problem we face. We've spent 40 years under or not funding pensions. Many of them are contractual obligations that are unbreakable. 98% of the tier 1 employees are retired, and you would break property law and US constitutional law to try to revoke what a person is currently receiving. Our teachers variably are identified as being relatively well paid in the pension system, and yet when you factor them against comparable states, the teachers are not participants in Social Security. So if you balance their full pension benefit versus any other comparable state, they're probably marginally underfunded or underpaid. So where do we do going forward? I think the measures that Alex had mentioned and Libby mentioned in terms of negotiations. In July of 2021, I believe we have the first window on the CBAC agreements, and we'll open up negotiations. Those negotiations have to be a combination of looking at increased contributions for both the health plans and the retirement contributions. Away from us in other states, the contributions are between 7 and 8%. I believe we average 2.5 or 3% within the state. So the employees are going to need to shoulder a larger burden. And if you look at the average pension, and there is a problem, you would argue then that you can start on a graduated basis, starting with a pension of 40,000 or 50,000, and work up the pay scale for those that are receiving particularly generous pensions. You'd want to make sure that they were contributing to support what is a relatively generous pension. Going forward, the question of whether we maintain the pension system or switch to a 401k is fraught with some concerns, because in converting to a 401k, you probably would have to fully fund and close the existing obligations, which would, in current dollars, cost you anywhere between $30 and $40 billion. So I don't think anyone that's sitting at this table today is happy in the situation we've inherited. And I think we're all going to be working to solve it. There'll be various approaches, and I would suggest that we will all put our heads together and try to figure out what is palatable and what is achievable up in Hartford for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry, you're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Yes, here we go. So, there are two sides to the problem: revenue side and the expense side. The expense side, Livy so well has pointed out, where we can make savings, we can get savings. And those are, we'll have to do them. And the methodology is, both Livy and Steve pointed out, are going to be through negotiations, and that has to be done. But that alone is not going to be sufficient. That alone is not going to be sufficient. But however, I want to make sure, I'm going to use a little bit of screen share here to point out that we are missing one very important element of this problem. It's not just, it's historical, as well as here, I will share this here. Do you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a basic, before when this question was given to me, I just put together some basic numbers, right? So 5-year GDP nominal growth, and this is nominal. So real dollar, not real dollars, actual dollar growth. So we were running 4.5%, 5%, and actually in the year ending, 5 years ending 2010, we were really doing very well. And then boom, the recession hit and we never recovered. We never recovered on the nominal basis. And what really this happened was that the policies which we did, it is called super austerity when you can't afford austerity. We started contributing most to our pension plans when we could afford it least. And we raised taxes most at a point when it was counterproductive. And that's, for example, saying, well, we should have no help for not pass the CARES Act right now, because nobody agrees with that. Something like that we did at the state level. Now, what was the cost? The cost was, if we had grown at an average rate that the country is growing, and it's lower than the 10 years prior, it's because obviously we had the big recession, we would have had $4 billion more in annual revenues for the state every year. And all of us know that would really go a long, long way in solving this problem. So my point is that while we talk about the solutions, and one of the points I heard earlier was, let's fund it to the maximum amount, right all the way. Well, what we cannot do is basically do anything which is not going to restore our growth. If we don't restore our growth, that pension problem, we will not be able to pay. The only way we're going to do is basically grow out of this problem. So growth is important, at least as the same level as our national growth. So a lot of policies we can go over. This is a detailed question. Adopted over the last 10 years have been disastrous in terms of growth. We know, you can see it in terms of number of people being here, the tax collection, economy, all of the above. So that's one way we got to handle it. Now, the second thing is the expense side. And the liability side has been very well pointed out that there are some clear things we have to do, but there's the risk transfer element. We cannot take the risk as a state because we are levered. A levered person, if you have too much debt, you cannot take risk. And I would think normally for longer term investors, 7 or 8% is a reasonable rate of return. For our state, it's 5 or 6%. So however, if we can tell the unions and the employees, listen, this is a time when you need to take over the risk at an 8% or at a rate which normally, most likely you're going to be able to get. So that transfer of liability, which is converting the current pensions either into a 401k with a fixed amount of sum, will have to be necessary as a part of the a solution. Because we can't take the risk, the state cannot take a $100 billion risk, which can compound very quickly. So 1 percentage point change in return will equate to tens of billions of dollars. And if the state investor makes a mistake, the state can't pay for it. Whereas if we basically try to solve this problem more at an individual basis, there's enough money out there. It's not as if we have $0 in the pension fund right now. We do have close to $35 billion in there. We're short, but that's because we have to assume as a state, we're gonna earn very little, or we're going to earn only 6% going forward. So, but at the same time, having suggested these big picture solutions, I will tell you, it's not an easy problem. It's not an easy problem because we're gonna convince everyone, but at the same time, the solutions exist by making sure that we keep growing and not obsess about this problem so much that we kill the very revenue source, which is going to supply dollars to answer this problem. I'll leave it there, and we can talk more about these in the Q&A. Stop share. Thank you.
Okay. Our second question has to do with absentee ballots in the upcoming election. And I'm just noticing that a lot of the audience questions are regarding that as well. So I would invite the audience to ask different questions because we will have a little more time after this one is answered. So this is our question. I haven't asked you yet.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. What would you do to ensure that U.S. citizens who are registered to vote feel they can vote and do it safely from a health perspective in the November 3rd election in Connecticut, assuming the COVID-19 restrictions are still in place? Should Lamont's public health emergency order, which expands absentee ballots for COVID-19, be extended? Now anyone can answer. Who wants to answer first? Okay, Libby, you go.
All right. Well, in short, yes, I do think so. His current executive order ends September 9th, but there's no reason why he cannot re-up by having an emergency, and then it can go forward. But that is going to be supposedly part of the agenda of the special session on July 22nd, I believe it is now. And what I think will happen there is that the legislature will allow illness, either your own illness or fear of COVID, to be a legitimate and ethical reason to apply for an absentee ballot for the November election. And I think that's the way to go, because changing the Constitution to get rid of those 5 reasons that are excuses for absentee ballot is a debate for a calmer, cooler, more collected time. We're not going to get it done in a day. And as you know, I have been a fan and a proponent of no excuse absentee ballot my entire legislative life. It began in 2000. Do you remember that contested election? Bush-Gore, Chad happened. So that's when we started studying all kinds of voting systems, and mail-in has been adopted in at least 4 or 5 states now. What is it? Colorado, Hawaii, Utah, Oregon, and Washington, and that's all they do is mail in. And it increases voter participation. It allows you not to have to close down schools. It cuts costs, staffing, and machines, and it works. So there you have it.
So I'd like to address this too, because it is a critical issue, and I've been an outspoken advocate for every citizen's right to vote safely. I would do exactly what the Secretary of State advises. I support her view that everyone deserves the right to vote by mail, so they don't have to choose between their health and voting. I spoke to the Secretary of State yesterday. She is being sued. Republicans have filed, I think now 3 lawsuits against her, claiming that allowing people to vote by mail due to COVID is unconstitutional. Thankfully, the League of Women Voters joined with a few other organizations and filed a countersuit alleging that all registered voters should be allowed to use absentee ballots in November. And I agree with the League, and I agree with Secretary Merrill, because safe voting should be our constitutional right, and every voter should be allowed to choose how they feel safe voting this November, either in person or by mail. And the clock is ticking. The Secretary of State told me that July 31st is really the deadline, because after that, if changes are made or she doesn't know what is expected after that, then we will have problems in the November elections. So, so it is absolutely imperative, and I've been asking our legislative leaders to call a special session to address this ASAP. Personally, I think that we should legislate change beyond November 2020 election, and we should catch up to the majority of states in this country. And everyone should know that Connecticut is actually really behind in terms of election law. We're one of only 3 states in the country that has a constitution that prohibits early voting, and we're one of only 16 states that has a constitution that restricts mail voting or absentee ballots. So it's really time for sweeping and bold legislation that brings us up to date, so that everyone can exercise their right to vote safely and easily.
Steve? Oh.
I just want to add my voice in support of the absentee ballot initiative. As Alex and Libby have mentioned, it's a structural problem in Connecticut in that it is constitutional. Constitutional reform requires, I believe, 2/3 vote by both chambers to bring it to a referendum to then amend the Constitution or eliminate from the Constitution and create it under statute. When it's very onerous to reform the Constitution. There's only one option that exists, right? There's only one option that exists now, which is absentee ballot. And I want to clarify, because I've seen comments on the internet, et cetera. The exercise that we are going forward with is we are mailing applications for ballots to the registered voters of the Democrats and Republicans for the primary who are allowed to vote in a primary. If we pass the legislation on the definition of the illness, we will be mailing to all of the registered voters an application to apply to receive a ballot to vote. We are not wiring around the state votes. It's a misconception or a misrepresentation of what we're trying to do. In our democracy, one of the most important valid points in a democracy is to achieve a level of voter participation so that we can all stand proudly in our elected office and talk about a mandate we receive to represent our citizens. And that requires an active level of participation. And I would say, if you look at the developed world, our voting age population, we have about 50 some odd percent or 60% that are registered. And while the participation rate might be at 80, when you think about the voting age population and who picks, whether it's a president or a state rep, you're not getting to the numbers that I think you really want to see to validate the democracy. So I'm a big advocate. Thank you.
Thank you. Harry?
This time I hope I'm not muted. No,
No.
I'm unmuted. So yes, I fully support. I don't think there is anybody or too many people out there in the legislature who have a problem with any of this. I think this has been just made to be a political issue. I think it will pass 90-10, that's me speculating, but by a good plurality, that we want everyone who has the ability or the need to vote absentee because of COVID reasons to be able to vote absentee. And I absolutely see anybody, it's any other idea is not even defensible. What are we talking about? We're saying that we won't let people vote if they are immunocompromised. I don't know. Maybe there is somebody out there who thinks that way. But now here is the problem. That let's not politicize it. Let's not politicize everything to the entire end. Just like what Alex was saying, listen, you know, we want to do structural change here. There'll be time for structural debate because mail-in voting normally is 9% of mail-in votes or ballots are not counted on an average last year, 9%. Do I want 9% of the votes not counted? I don't. I don't know who feels it's fair. So let's leave those longer term questions of how much mail-in we need to have, of structural changes to a very good debate. I like debate, I like discussion. I don't think we should rush things under when there is a crisis so that people don't, and fear monger. That's wrong. So my idea is that in this current situation, clear, no issues whatsoever. We need to, I think, and we'll pass with a plurality, a nice plurality of votes, or nice majority. I think much larger than 51, 61, 71. I think it's going to be a large number of people. And as many folks in my caucus, on the other side, we have across the aisle, there is clarity that we will amend the definition to ensure that anybody who really feels uncomfortable should be able to download the form and send it out. Now, I want to ask all the listeners here, how many of you are really excited right now and really waiting so badly to vote for the primary, right? Because in each party, I think the primary candidate is pretty much done. I don't think there's that much excitement in the primary. And I still think it's very important to vote. But why would we waste $5 million mailing absentee forms for a primary which is not relevant? Why? You can still download and apply. There's no reason you cannot absentee vote. We should allow absentee voting even for the primary, but spending money which we don't have for something which has no purpose other than politicizing and taking political shots at other people. This is $5 million real money. And the only answer we have heard is this was federal money, which is a very poor answer. I really think that wasting such amount of money, $5 million of public money for a cause which is not defined at all, for the primary. I'm talking the primary, which is the money spent to mail these ballots, these absentee application form. I see no, you can download them, you can sign them, you can send them. And if you don't want to download because you can't print at your home, you can call the town hall, they will send them to you. I just don't see why this was done. I think this politicizing is wrong, but at the same time, to reiterate, every person in this November who fears that they don't feel comfortable because of COVID reasons to come out should have the right to vote absentee. Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's good to know that you all agree that it should be extended to the November 3rd election. I will let Becky start asking some of the questions that are coming in from our audience.
Excuse me, Joanne, the executive order includes all of this sending ballots and wasting money. We're not agreeing on that. What we agreeing is—
I know, I was saying that I'm glad that you all agree that the absentee ballot for the November 3rd election, that it should be, there for everyone to vote. Because in some areas of the country, some people are afraid of fraud, and I don't think we see that here. So I'm just glad that both parties agree to that. That's what I meant. Okay.
Okay, so we're taking these questions in the order they came. And there's a question on, hi, what do you think of the desegregate Connecticut movement zoning? Is its possible direction and chance of success?
I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
It's around local zoning.
Oh.
There's a desegregate Connecticut movement. Okay.
Okay, I'll address that. I'm not familiar with the details of that because I don't think they've been disclosed, but my understanding is that the Desegregate Connecticut movement is about high opportunity zones and creating more access to high opportunity zones, and Greenwich would be considered a high opportunity zone in terms of affordable housing. So, and this has been an issue for many, many, many years. And the allegation is that housing laws are used, or at least the moratorium on affordable housing is used to keep minorities out of a town. Now, again, I have not seen any of the details of this proposal, so I would not opine on it at this moment. And it's been a long-standing issue, so I don't think, and it's very complex, so I don't think the likelihood of it being addressed in this special session is high at all.
I would agree with that. It's under 8-30G. A lot of people feel that because you're supposed to have 10% of your housing inventory in affordable or marketplace housing, workforce housing, that developers use that to stretch the local zoning laws. And then it also comes all the way around about should taxes be based on property? I mean, should property taxes be collected locally, or should they all go to Hartford and then be redistributed? And that's basically the nut that they're looking for in this. So there won't be reliance on local property taxes, basically.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll add in here that a couple of things that that element of taking our Greenwich or our local town dollars, sending them first to Hartford is really not something our community supports. We absolutely cannot, stand that idea. I don't know if there are many of our listeners really are supporting that idea. I think it is local control of our dollars and our schools is important to our community. I also think that talking about affordable housing, the Greenwich Affordable Housing Authority has done a really good job in making sure that we're improving and making public housing really good. And they're expanding as well. They're increasing the number of units, albeit slowly, but at the same time, the quality, that's important. You don't want affordable housing to be bad housing. It is good housing. We need to reinvest in that. These should be just like we invest in our towns. We need to keep investing and updating those houses, and they do a good job of that. And I think perhaps they're amongst the best in the country. So let's just make a note of that. Thank you.
Also, I think what Greenwich does, we should follow our Stanford model, and it shouldn't just be a pocket of public housing. It should be, interspersed throughout the community. And maybe that's what this desegregate means, Alex. That's the only thing I can think of. But Stanford has done a wonderful job of having workforce housing and moderate income housing sprinkled throughout the city.
Great,
Steve?
thank you.
Steve wanted to say something.
When we talk about the issue of segregation and we talk about the issue of economic opportunity, we all have to reflect not solely as a community, but as a country. And it's incumbent on all of us as citizens and as legislators that we work for a more open society, that we work to improve opportunity space, and that high opportunity areas, that there's opportunity for people to find a place there and to grow and to thrive. As a state, it's an issue as we look across the state, and it should be concerning to all of us because all of us, either as public officials or as private persons, have been involved in those issues of charity, social work, working with the nonprofits. And what is that goal for all of us? It's to wake up in the morning and know we've moved a needle and improved people's lot in life. And I can't think of, a more important legacy than to feel that you've advanced the arc of justice for as many people as possible. And so to that extent, if that's part of the goal of the movement, we want to improve the arc of justice for all of our citizens. This is why all of our ancestors came here, for a better opportunity. And it wasn't to shut the door on the opportunity space for the other residents in our country. And that's it, sorry.
Okay, this next question is broad, but it says, please talk about your role in economic development for Connecticut.
Well, my role has basically been through the bonding with the Small Town Economic Assistance Program and various other projects that are public-private partnerships, infrastructure, transportation, and that. Other than that, I've never served on any other committee other than finance that had anything to do with it.
Steve?
Sorry.
Oh, Steve?
Yep, got it. Yeah, my role has been twofold. I sit on energy and technology, and I sit on bonding revenue and finance. I think I got it right this time. Libby corrects the order in which I give it. So I'll go for a very classic economic case. Last year, I was a strong advocate for reduction in the sales tax on boats. Coming from Greenwich, the question was how many boats I owned. But the issue was I didn't own a boat. And I made it very clear that the issue was that those boat sales and taxes were going, and the commission income and the revenue was happening in Rhode Island or in New York, and the maintenance of those boats and the storage of those boats. So I advocated for a cut from 10%, I believe, to a 5% sales tax on boat sales, arguing, and the chairman of my committee always, he rolls his eyes because I say, what's the capture? And the idea being, what's the economic activity? How much revenue can I capture for the state? Because if I raise the sales rates or tax rates and the business flows away from the state, it's a self-defeating prophecy. So I look to figure out where the points of resistance to increase economic activity. So on that side, on bonding revenue and finance, I'm attuned to the collection of tax revenue for the state, but successful tax collection revenue where I'm not driving business or economic activity out of the state. On the opposite side, in energy and technology, our tax dollars were going to support third-party energy suppliers, which the practice is incorrigible and unsustainable. We were providing over $7 million of your tax dollars in energy assistance to the most needy and vulnerable residents. They were being marketed by people who were marking up the energy prices on average 20%. My tax dollars were basically allowing people to purchase premium electricity. And I don't know if you have much engineering background, but there is no premium electricity. It's like water. And I've worked to both work with the private sector to encourage the growth of the private sector and to protect the public sector expenditures in the most rational way I can see. The next step I will look at is the third-party energy suppliers, which are in general collecting on the order of $45 million of surcharges from Connecticut residents and providing absolutely zero value. So if we're trying to protect their pocketbook, it's either their tax dollars or when they fail to look at their energy bill and realize that it's a 20% premium to make sure that there's a fair competitive market and fair pricing. So that's how I'm looking at the economy.
So,
Right, go ahead, Alex.
oh, thanks. Economic development encompasses almost everything that I try to do because I'm focused entirely on improving the economic outlook for our state and for all its residents, creating opportunity, drawing businesses here, bringing in new revenue, new residents to actually grow the economy so that future generations can have prosperity and opportunity. Some of the specific things that I have done, well, I talked earlier about my student loan bill, which passed and is now law, the first of its kind in Connecticut. But other things that I did to try to stimulate growth and investment in Connecticut, well, obviously tolls, which would have reduced the tax burden on residents and certainly drawn more businesses here with improved infrastructure, faster trains, et cetera. But another thing that I don't get to talk about a lot, and I'll just mention it here, is my work to expand the Green Bank in Connecticut, because we know that clean energy and green jobs are actually the new way of developing jobs. So the Green Bank is already, it's been established, it operates very successfully, but it has a very narrow window of authority. And I passed a bill in the Senate to expand its authority so that it could apply to all sorts of environmental infrastructure jobs and projects. And unfortunately, it did not get raised in the House, but had it, we would have a very successful way of creating thousands of jobs in clean energy. We did actually pass another bill which expanded wind energy in Connecticut. That was a significant bill. So hopefully we'll create a lot of jobs in that industry. But sitting as the vice chair of transportation, I'm always focused on transportation infrastructure because that's the foundation of our economy and how best to finance it. And also on banking, as the chair, that's where I initiate many of my bills. And then on judiciary. Judiciary is all about justice. So everything I do is with the priority of creating economic opportunity and advancement.
I'd just like to say that we are
Karen, did you want to say something?
we're at 6:30 and we are going to extend for 10 more minutes, 15 more minutes maximum, if the legislators are still comfortable with that. So audience members, please don't leave yet. We have a couple more questions that we can get through.
Nice.
Thank you. So let me say that growth, as I mentioned even in my answer to the other question, is a very important thing. Now, I am a freshman House member, so I do not sit in any very big, powerful committees, but I sit on higher education, which I think is incredibly important, and commerce and banking alongside Senator Kasser. And what I want to point out is growth is what is going to come from good policies. And in the last few years, we haven't. If we are going to pass dry cleaning taxes and taxes on even the family leave was funded by extra payroll tax. Extra payroll tax. Payroll tax is the worst. There is bad taxes, worse taxes, and really, really bad taxes. And payroll tax is at the bottom of the barrel. It hits the person who's making $7 or the minimum wage, $10.20. Take a bite out of them. No, we don't stand for that. We do not want to take a bite out of the person who's making, minimum wage. Come on, why do we do this to ourselves? So growth is going to depend, and economic opportunity is going to come from investment. Investment in education, investment in infrastructure, just like Senator Kasser said, and we're going to focus on that. And also taking out the waste and the ineffectiveness. At this point, I will tell you that having seen some of these agencies, especially the Department of Labor and how they work, this is a broken system. This is a broken system. This is a broken, half this government is broken. They do not work well. They do not have computers. Think about that if you did not have a computer today and you had a computer which was a mainframe which ran on COBOL. I don't know what that COBOL is. They keep saying COBOL, right? And I don't know how you would operate. I don't know how we would operate. We cannot, and that's why they can't operate. They're spending 10 times the amount they would because they have COBOL. Now, I know they want to go away from COBOL, but my point is it's taking too long. And in the meantime, you're wasting hundreds of millions, and Green Bank is great, but it's a 100 million idea. I'm talking about the solar, utility scale solar was a 10 billion idea. That's what's going to make us leader. Wind energy is great, but you know what? We spend 3 times the cost of conventional energy. We want to bring market-friendly ideas, competitive economy ideas. Not just, hey, listen, let's subsidize. Subsidy is not going to be, it's only finite amount of money you can take from A and get to B and B to A to B. Doesn't go anywhere. In the end, it comes back to roost. So my point is growth is important. We got some great ideas we're working on. And let's just basically focus on these competitive market friendly ideas and we'll get the job done.
Okay, let's try to get maybe another question or two in. Becky, do you want to do the next one?
Okay, this is turning away from what we've been discussing. There's a question that says, what do you see happening with gun safety legislation? Specifically HB 5448, updating our existing red flag extreme risk protection order legislation to, among other things, allow family members or medical professionals to petition the court directly if they have reason to believe someone with access to firearms may be a danger to themselves or others.
I think Alex would probably know more about that from Judish.
Well, I'm very committed to gun safety. I'm not familiar with the details of that specific bill off the top of my head, but I can assure you that if it would increase protection for victims and decrease gun violence, then I am in favor and will help move it through committee when we're back in session. But everyone should know that we actually had a very successful 2019 legislative session on gun safety, and were able to pass 3 new gun safety laws, which is pretty remarkable because in the past, it was really only 1 bill per year. So we moved a lot of legislation in 2019 and will continue to do so. That is a top priority.
Steve, you're on mute, but go ahead.
So if you step back and look at where we are today in the economy with the pandemic and the stresses that our society is facing, the pressures, the general unacceptable tone of dialogue, and now what's going on in families and children and the pressures of everyone locked at home, the idea that the red flag law, as I understand it, is to raise or widen the circle of people who can raise a level of intervention for someone who is experiencing emotional stress, and therefore to prevent the next step in a crisis when there is an arm in the house. It speaks to that issue. It speaks indirectly when we talk now in our prison reform and we go through, and not to drag into all conversations, but we're moving from a point in our society where we're looking at the incarceration rate and looking at, are we working on the criminal element or is it a mental health element? And it speaks to the same issues along the spectrum of treating people who are in distress, people who have problems, and protecting their family or themselves from themselves in the form of a red flag law. I think it's part of what we are as a society. Is we always talk about this. It's how we look at the people who are in a vulnerable situation, and they could be living in my zip code or Harry's or Alex's or Livy's, and we don't know what goes on behind those doors. And the pressures in society are horrible today, and therefore I think it's incumbent on us to try to make sure that people are sheltered and safe. And I think the red flag law will help accomplish that.
Okay. Harry?
Yes, serving a community and compassion is extremely important. That's why we are all here. I think, just making sure that our constituents are well served and, responsible ownership of guns and making sure that the gun violence goes asymptotically to 0 is our objective. There are things that can happen, but, compassion to make sure we improve fairness in our society, to improve justice, to work all we can do for those who are struggling. And while our community is very, very prosperous in many ways, but there are many amongst us who need help and who need opportunity. That's what we are here for. I've had really the honor of over the last few months meeting so many of our constituents and helping them, and it's so rewarding. I thank you all for this opportunity. I'm so blessed to have this opportunity to serve you. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question? Did anyone?
Go ahead, Joanne. The next one's probably going to be of interest to many people on the
Special ed, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The next question is, the increasing cost of providing special education services are straining local election budgets for most school districts across the state. How can the legislator help address this issue? And this will be our last question. Does anybody want to take a stab at that? No?
Well, listen, Steve, why don't you go ahead? You know a lot about this.
Steve sits on education on RTM.
Well, I did. Now I'm on Department of Public Works in Libby. I took a break after 15 years.
Okay.
Don't forget.
Okay. So it's a polemical issue in that special ed is again an issue of concern, of equality, of fairness and access. And what you're finding is that you're getting some zip code shopping, as they say, where people are looking to get the best services possible for their children, which is what I would do. And the question of what are the judicious use of the resources when the resources all come from the town. So you could, the Republican mantra would be it's an unfunded mandate, and it's not an attack. It is, we're talking about what we want to do for our most vulnerable citizens. There is no easy answer. Harry, I don't think either of us has that gentle an answer of how do we allocate the resources to people in need and make sure that their children have fair and a judicious use of our resources to get the best education. I mean, I'm not participant too, but I hear the dialogue at the local level now where it's reaching a crescendo where people are asking for the appropriate resources. That will strain our budget, and we will have to wrestle with that. Well, on that benefit, I won't have to wrestle the issue at the local level. At the state level, I'm not sure what level do we modify the legislation, but the trouble with the modification of legislation will ultimately weaken the parents who are advocates for their children. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that issue either. So the real question is, do we need a third-party panel to arbitrate to make sure that there are adequate resources dedicated to our children? Anyone who's had a child with special needs, who sacrificed their life to raise a child and to give them an opportunity space, will fight tooth and nail. And I salute that effort. And I think we have to figure with compassion, how do we balance that need? And I don't actually, even after 15 years, have the best answer to that. But I think all of us, when we talk about our mission to serve, those are the kinds of questions where I go to bed at night and I stare up at the ceiling and say, am I doing something right or wrong? And because I know there's an impact that's just terrific. So it's a very tough issue. I don't think I'm an advocate for decreasing resources. I just think there may be a way of figuring out how do we judiciously allocate the resources and make sure that we are doing the best for the best interest of the children.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think from a principal perspective, I think it's a very simple issue. We have to provide as much resource for special ed as we can, from a practical we have. But as Steve said, it's not easy because resources are always constrained. But there is no trade-offs. Just as we said, education. I personally look at my life and life of so many I know. We would be nowhere. We'd be in really bad situation if we didn't get the right opportunity for education. So there is just no question about it. Now, I think I'm very optimistic that we got technology around the corner, right? This technology is not being used enough. It's not being used enough, and perhaps not maybe specifically in special ed, but in our educational system overall. And we will, over a period of time, we will introduce more technology and get more savings. We got some savings recently in the local situation, and across the state, we will get more savings through technology. And that can be transferred then for special ed and other good things.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sorry that we don't have time to answer any more questions. So I will let Aya take over now.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I want to say thank you to our legislators for a really interesting and informative discussion. There's clearly lots to be done still, and it's obvious that COVID-19 has delayed a lot of really important bills and discussions. We hope that that will change soon and that we will be back to getting things done and that you guys can get back to sessions to get things moved through really quickly. We would like to thank all of our members who have stayed on for the additional 15 minutes. Thank you to everybody for participating. It's very important that you all participate in the democratic process. So these conversations really lend a lot to that. And we hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please be sure to follow us on our social media accounts on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. It's League of Women Voters, or LWV Greenwich. You'll find us on all of those platforms. We also have a couple of things that we'd like to share with you. As you can see on the screen, we have a lot of really fabulous and interesting events coming up over the next few months into the end of the year. We hope that you will sign up and participate in those. We expect right now to be continuing with our digital formats until and unless things improve on the COVID front, hopefully. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. And one more thing, we have a new website being launched next month, and please look out for notification of that in your inboxes. We're going to be making it easier for you to participate, to engage in the democratic process, and to find resources and information about everything that's happening in your local area from a political and civic. So thank you everybody again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you, legislators.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was interesting.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you,
to meet
everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night. Good night. Should we just